Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are live on YouTube and we are teaching the class, and we are going to continue right now with our class in Samach Vav. And the topic today is developing the third question. So we started off about Shofar, and we basically asked the question, the main question we asked is, how can it be that when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, we don't blow the shofar, knowing all the incredible power that shofar brings to the world? That's really the central theme and idea of everything we're discussing over here. So knowing the incredible power of shofar, how could it be? How could we do without the shofar? That's the question that the Maimon centers around. And it's leading us into a very deep discussion in terms of the actual hamshachas, the actual energies that are drawn down for the entire year through the shofar. So what we're going to read now, we actually read last week. We're going to develop the third question. I'm going to do this a little more quickly, even though we could probably learn the same paragraph every day of our lives and learn more and more into it. But we're going to go a little quickly in the first part, and then we're going to conclude this first part of here. We're going to go to the next segment as it is in Samach Vav, but I will do that as we're going along. So let's read, developing the third question. And the editor over here, commentator who put this together for Chayenu, writes like this. The third question asked was that the shofar draws Atzmus Eir Ein Sof into the world, and that should not be abandoned on Shabbos. This question will now be reinforced by proving conclusively that the creative energy that emanates throughout creation on Rosh Hashanah is drawn down through the blowing of the shofar. And now we say like this, Ubifrat. So how can we skip shofar? The abandoning of the mitzvah of shofar is particularly perplexing, given that every drawing of divine energy on Rosh Hashanah occurs through the shofar. To explain, Rosh Hashanah represents the reconstruction of Malchus. And we spoke last week about Malchus and how Malchus, the king, comes down to be an active ruler over the kingdom. And we spoke last week about the importance of we spoke about the idea of Ein Melech B'lo Am. You don't have a king if you don't have a nation, and the nation has to accept the king, and that a legitimate king only rules by the will of the governed. This reconstruction is possible because the state of Keser, literally crown Malchus, and we said there's this level called Keser Malchus. And last week we spoke about the fact that Keser in Malchus is the active rulership, which is really the lowest level for the king, where you have to go down and get involved in governing. Right? The king for himself has no interest in governing, but governing is about actually going there and being part of the plebes, right? Taking care of the plebes, taking care of the people, taking care of the land, taking care of the roads, taking care of the things that are involved in actually governing. And so the king doesn't really want to govern, but the king is willing to govern if the people want him to govern. Maybe he really does want. And that's really what we're going to analyze over here, is how much does the king want and how much doesn't the king want. And we're going to say essentially that in the beginning, when Hashem first created the world, he wanted to have a world. But now he only wants to be involved if we want him to be involved. This is the whole dynamic over here. And we spoke about the fact that so Malchus is the lowest level of the 10 spheres, which is the actual involvement in the other. In the personal understanding of what the spheres are inside of us. So we all know we have intellect, we have emotions. Malchus reflects speech. The whole concept of speech, Malchus is speech. The whole concept of speech is that I reveal to you what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking. By definition, thought is for me, speech is for you. Mm-hmm. Thought is for me, speech is for you. Now, speech obviously it's for me too, because it's for the relationship, but it's got to do with the other. Without an other, there is no speech. Without the other, there is no speech. As we know, the famous question, the famous conundrum: if a tree falls in the Amazon and there's no one there to hear it, that'll make a noise, or more importantly, if a man says something and his wife's not there to tell him that he's wrong, did he ever say something in the first place? right? So anyway, the point is that Keser, so Malchus is about the other. And that's what Rosh Hashanah is all about. Rosh Hashanah, we're building Malchus, which means we're creating a connection between Hashem and the other, Hashem and the world. It's about connecting with the other. It's about Hashem saying, okay, I'm going to be actively involved with the world in a way that I really want to be involved with this world. So the question is, and I'm speaking quite fast now because we spoke a lot about this last week. So then there's the desire for that. And Keser, we said the highest, the crown at the top, the crown is where Ratzon is. And last week we spoke at great length about the concept of Ratzon, the concept of desire. And we said last week's class was centered around the idea that you only understand what you want to understand. A lot of times people don't understand because they don't want to understand. Like I have a friend who says to me, don't confuse me with the facts. I know what I want. I know what I think. I know what I want to think. And I don't want you to confuse me with the facts. Now he's joking, but he's honest. He's honest. A lot of people don't want to understand things any differently. A lot of people don't want to really. I know what I want. And that's it. You see this all the time with sports. That you see two people sitting and debating. This one says the Yankees are better, and this one says the Mets are better, and facts have nothing to do with it. It doesn't matter. I know what I want it to be, and therefore every bit of evidence that you give me, I won't accept, and every bit of evidence I give you, you won't accept because we have because desire is determining intellect. Desire turns intellect in the direction that it wants to go. So. Right, you with me, everybody? Does all this make sense? So, back to the text to explain. Rosh Hashanah represents the reconstruction of Malchus, literally kingship. This reconstruction is possible because the state of Keser, literally the crown of Malchus, is drawn into Malchus at that time. It is for this reason that the holiday is called Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. It refers to the drawing from the level of Keser Malchus, literally the crown of Malchus, which occurs then, as explained in Pri Eitz Chaim. So that is the Kabbalistic jargon, the concept as it is, which means, we're going to explain what it means. The notion of Keser Malchus is known to be synonymous with the will for kingship, the desire to be the king. Since the ultimate source of the flow of godliness that occurs in Rosh Hashanah is exceedingly high. Ultimately, it comes from the inner Atzmus level of Eir Ein Sof, as is written regarding Rosh Hashanah. This is the anniversary of the start of your handwork, a remembrance of the first day. Meaning, just as on that first day, at the beginning of creation, there was an arousal of God's will within himself, an arousal of the will to rule, and a will for the world called the first stirrings of the will of the king. That refers to the state of Atzmas Eir Ein Sof as it is before the Tzimtzum. I'm going to come back and read this again slowly and explain. So too now, on every single Rosh Hashanah, when everything reverts to its original state, God's will to rule must be aroused as it is in its inner dimension, in the etzem of Ein Sof, blessed is he. So now we're going to read it again. We're going to read some commentary. So we got to read these notes, and then we're going to go back and read the text, this paragraph again. Wait. Etzem, definitions. First, we need some glossary. We need and analyze the word etzem. The word etzem is the same concept as the word atzmut. Okay, so we're going to see sometimes etzem and we're going to see sometimes atzmut or atzmus. Okay, etzem. Here we have etzem and we have atzmus. You see that? So what is etzem? Etzem literally means everybody needs to, if you're a participant in this class, you are required, ladies and gentlemen, to to familiarize yourself with this word etzem. With this word etzem. It's a very important that this is an important topic, okay? Etzem. Going to learn the word in Hebrew and understand it. It's essence. Essence, anything as it is in relation to itself. That's a good definition. It is for itself. That's an interesting definition. The etzem is the identity of any object, concept, or living being as it is itself. The notion of the etzem is based on the philosophical principle that everything has a component of self that exists solely for itself without any form of outward expression. For instance, the etzem of a man is only that he is. His attributes such as his profession, temperament, or tendencies are descriptions of his various aspects. His actual existence, however, cannot be defined. In his etzem state, he only exists. I would not have necessarily defined it this way. It's a very interesting it's a very interesting commentary that this is how they're explaining etzem. We're going to keep going. We're going to come back to this, okay? Malchus, Keser, and Atzmus. So in other words, with Hashem, in God, when we're talking about the etzem of Hashem, the essence of God, we're talking about God as he is God for himself, only for himself, before anything else comes into existence, deeper than any other element of any expression, any thought, any idea, the very core and essence of who God is.
But why do we need two words? I mean, we have a soul. Why do we need another word?
Yeah. Josh asked a very interesting question. We have a concept of Ein Sof, there is no end, which also refers to the Ein Sof, the light of the one who's in it. And sometimes we talk about, is it Ein Sof? Does that mean that the light is Ein Sof, or does that mean it's the of the Ein Sof? The Ein Sof is already a description, even though it's in Ba'ofen Shlili. It's a negation of an end. You with me? But it already gives you an expression, a concept of vast. If you're talking about vast, you're already in the realms of definition. You're talking about a spatial concept, or at least a thing. You know, you're outside of etzem. Etzem is deeper than that, because etzem is even deeper than Ein Sof. It's the essence of the Ein Sof. Essence is the etzem means the essence of the Ein Sof. Ein Sof is already relation. There's the concept of Sof, and it's Ein Sof. Etzem is deeper than that. Etzem is the core, the essence of Hashem. As God is for himself, unrelated to anything else, just because God is God, in the very deepest core of what God is. Higher than ideas, higher than thoughts, higher than feelings. There are no thoughts, there are no feelings, there are no desires, there's nothing, just God. That's Etzem. So the highest, deepest is etzem. I use the word highest. You can't even say highest for etzem, because it's the etzem of the highest, and it's the etzem, and it's the same everywhere. And it's never changing, and it's the core of everything. Then you get Malchus, Keser, and Atzmus. Okay, I'm not reading this. So let's now go back and read this paragraph in Hebrew, and then we're going to read this paragraph in English. This paragraph is a crucial paragraph. The Inyan Keser Malchus, the idea, the notion of Keser Malchus. I'm going to read English and Hebrew together, right? So can you see I'm reading this Hebrew, and I'm going to read from this in English as well. We're going to go at the same time. The Inyan Keser Malchus, the notion of Keser Malchus, Yodua, it's known, this is known to be synonymous with the will for kingship. And we already explained that Keser, the crown, is the will. So Keser, Malchus, is the will, the desire for Malchus, the desire for kingship. The Shoresh HaHamshacha, the root, the ultimate source of the flow of godliness. Hula Maila Ma'oid Bibechinas Pnimius Va'atzmus Eir Ein Sof Chulu. Since the ultimate source of the flow of godliness that occurs on Rosh Hashanah is exceedingly high, ultimately it comes from the inner Atzmus level of Eir Ein Sof, the Atzmus of Eir Ein Sof, the essence of the Eir Ein Sof. As it is written regarding Rosh Hashanah, this is the anniversary of the start of your handiwork, a remembrance of the first day.
Now,
Wait. The Kemei b'yem Rosh Hashanah b'tchilas habriya, she'bechinas his eirus ratzon b'tzad atzmoi. Just as on the first day, at the beginning of creation, there was an arousal of God's will within himself. Right? God, before creation, at the beginning of creation, God desired to have a world. What caused that desire in God? Where does it come from? It comes from God himself. God was aroused to have a world. God desired, he was aroused. Oh, I want to have a world. Right? Or there would never have been a world. How do we know God wanted a world? Because he made one. The fact that he made a world, we know he wanted it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done it. Like I once asked an older chassid, how do you know the Rebbe wanted you to come to New York on a certain trip? How do you know the Rebbe wanted you to come? And he told me, because he paid for my ticket. The Rebbe sent the money for his ticket. If he didn't want him to come, he wouldn't have paid for his ticket. Right? How do we know God wanted to make a world? Because he paid for it. He made it. He did it.
I have a question.
Wait. Just as on that first day at the beginning of creation, there was an arousal of God's will within himself. Or from himself. An arousal of the will to rule and a will for the worlds. An arousal of the will to run a will and a will for the world called in. Footnote 17 says the Zohar, it's referred to in the Zohar as, the Zohar says, the first stirrings of the will for the king. Reish Hur Manisa de Malka. So it's right, the first stirrings that Hashem had for a will to be king, that refers to the state of Atzmus Eir Ein Sof as it is before the Tzimtzum. In other words, before there was a world, there was just God. And there had to be a Tzimtzum. So before the Tzimtzum, before anything, God had to want a world. Otherwise, none of it would have happened. So the question is, does God still want it?
Well, a question. How long was there before God decided he wanted a world? I mean, although I guess time didn't exist. So
time hadn't been created yet.
So, all right. So we don't know.
So,
I have a question.
so too now on every single Rosh Hashanah, when everything reverts to the original state, everything goes. Rosh Hashanah is a refresh. God's will to rule must be aroused. Are we going to get new vitality for a new year? That's the real question of Rosh Hashanah. The real question of Rosh Hashanah is God going to be the king for another year? So the answer is, if he wants to. So the first time he did it on his own. But now he wants us to want him. And if we want him, then he says, okay, I'll do it again. So God's will to rule must be aroused as it is, and it's in the dimension, in the etzem of the Ein Sof, blessed is he. Not the will to rule as it is down here, but in the just like the original desire came from the deepest place, higher than all symptoms, higher than high. That's where the desire to rule comes from. So you have to penetrate to that deepest desire within Hashem on Rosh Hashanah as well. That's the level we have to reach. And how do we reach that deepest level? How do you reach the deepest level within Hashem to arouse the desire again that Hashem says, okay, yeah, I still want this world. All this occurs through the shofar. As it is said, as Hashem says to us, recite Malchus before me in order to accept my sovereignty over you. Zichroinus, the verses of remembrance. And with what? With what instrument should you do it? How should you do it? How are you going to arouse me to come back and be the king again? With a shofar. Clearly, as we've explained before, earlier in this page, the meaning of the simple cry of the shofar, which is the cry from the deepest part of the heart. Clearly, the simple cry of the shofar that emerges from the depths of the heart draws and awakens God's will to rule. How then did our sages... So then comes, if the shofar is crucial to arouse God's deepest desire, and the Torah says you should blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and really the whole thing works around the shofar. The shofar is what penetrates the cry from the deepest part of the heart, is symbolized with the cry of the shofar, is what penetrates to the deepest place within Hashem, in the etzem of God, in the essence. And that's where the original arousal to be king is re-aroused. And Hashem says, I want to be a king again. And we have to reach the highest level that can only be reached through the shofar. And it's so crucial that you blow the shofar. So how did the sages come along 2,000 years later, 1,000 years later, and say, you know what, guys? There might be a guy named Joe Schmo, and he might forget that you can't carry on Shabbos. And so therefore, sorry, just in case some dude somewhere is going to forget that you're not supposed to carry, we're canceling shofar. And so what's going to happen? If you know what happens if you cancel shofar? If you cancel shofar, Hashem's not going to be aroused to be the king. He's not going to want to be the king. He's not going to want to be the king. All the blessings are not going to flow. Nothing's going to happen. There's going to be a detachment between God and the world. So how do you cancel shofar? You can't cancel shofar. If you cancel shofar, you're canceling the whole world. You cancel shofar, you're canceling everything. You can't cancel shofar. And yet, the sages canceled shofar. How do you? Why? For a stupid reason. For some stupid guy who maybe is going to carry a shofar on Shabbos. They cancelled shofar. It's obviously not stupid. They knew what they were doing. So the question is, how could it be? Why, knowing what shofar is, how was it cancelled? How do you do, what happened over here? Why? What's going on over here? And if we are cancelling shofar, which we did, how do we draw these levels of godliness on Rosh Hashanah without the shofar? How are we going to replace the shofar? What are we doing without the shofar? So the answer is true. The verses of shofars are read on Rosh Hashanah, which occurs in Shabbos as well. We do read the psukim. We read the verses. And we know there's a principle that reading the verses is almost like blowing the shofar. But the mitzvah of shofar and the accompanying service, which is performed through a deeply introspective cry, happens only when blowing the shofar. As much as you're reading the verses of the shofar, you're not blowing the shofar. So the question, yeah, we have the verses, but that's not enough. That's not enough. So we have a huge question. Understanding now what we've learned so far, we have this massive question. Everything depends on arousing Hashem's desire to be the king. Again, the way it was the first year, which comes from the essence of Hashem. And the only way to reach that level, the way to reach that level, it seems, is through blowing the shofar, which is the cry from the heart. There's so much at stake here. How do we cancel shofar? And if we do cancel shofar, the only way we can cancel shofar is if there's a substitute. The only way we can cancel shofar is if there's a substitute. And you say, well, there's the verses, but come on, that's not the blowing of the shofar. It's not the same thing. So what is going to replace, what's going on over here? How do we explain this whole thing? This concludes the first section of the Maimah as arranged by Chayenu. In just a second, we're going to go to the second section. But before we do that, Josh has a burning question that he has patiently waited to ask.
When they are smooth.
Yes.
Can't hear his question, Rabbi.
Because it's like it's end. the Pnimiyut and the Atzmut.
Wait 1 second. Good question. Let's
So
go.
it's like two different-
Wait.
two different things.
Wait. Hey, but this is misad matzin. Second line. For Indian males, Malchus is in Ratzim. The Sherish, I'm Shacha Hula Milam, Edbichnis Pnimius, for Atzmus, Eid Ein Sof. In the deeper dimension. How do they translate this?
Well, this is the problem. There mean two equivalent things. Pnimiyut and Atzmut.
It comes from the inner Atzmus level of Eid Ein
I
Sof.
understand it, but it should have been not there. It should have been Pnimiyut shel Atzmut.
Wait, good question. Because Pnimius, it comes from the inner dimension and the essence of the Eid Ein Sof. From the inner dimension, it's very high from the Pnimius
No,
and the essence of Eid Ein Sof. So your question is, why couldn't we just say, why do we need the word Pnimius? Why can't we just say Bebechinas Atzmus Eid Ein Sof?
No. Pnimiyut-
Wait, why or Pnimius Shel Atzmus? You can't say Pnimius Shel Atzmut.
Why not?
You can't say Pnimius Shel Atzmus. That's the answer to you. Josh says, why does it say Pnimius Vatzmus? You can't say Pnimius V'Atzmus. You can't say the inner dimension of Atzmus.
Huh?
No, you can't say that. I'll tell you why you can't say that. Because there is no chitzonius of Atzmus, and there is no external of Atzmus of the essence, and there is no internal of the essence. The essence is not divisible into an internal and an external. It's just essence.
What is the Pnimiyut?
So you hear what I'm saying? Essence is essence. Essence doesn't have an inner and an outer. Essence is essence. It's not. So you can't say. 1 second. You can't say Pnimius Shel Atzmus. Now the question is, so can you say Pnimius V'Atzmus? So you could say Pnimius. It's the Pnimius is going on the Or Ein Sof. It's the inner dimension of the Or Ein Sof,
Oh,
which is the essence of the Or Ein Sof. The deepest dimension and the essence
so
of the
Pnimiyut
Atzmus. Pnimius over here, but Pnimius doesn't always mean Atzmus. Not only is it the Pnimius of the Or Ein Sof, not only is it the inner aspect of the Or Ein Sof, but it's the essence of the Or Ein Sof. Not only is it the inner, but it's the essence.
So the Pnimiyut refers to the so Atzmut is-
The Atzmus of the Or Ein Sof. Atzmus Or Ein Sof. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
I have a question.
Thank you, Rachel.
I'm kind of stuck on this phrase where it said on Rosh Hashanah, when everything reverts to its original state. It's not saying it could revert if we didn't arouse it. It's saying when it says when it reverts, everything reverts to its original state. So what does that mean? That everything, the whole world disappears for a moment and we're not conscious of it, or?
It's a very good question. On Rosh Hashanah, everything reverts to its original state. I love the question. What
Which
I'm
is
going to do
non-existence.
quickly, huh?
Which is non-existence.
Wait a second.
Right, that's what I'm
Wait a
saying,
second.
yeah.
1 second. 1 second. I want to quickly look, Control C. Now I'm going to do Control F. And I want to see if the word Chayzer is more than once on this page, and it's not. It's only here once. Okay. So now Rachel's asking a question. What does it mean that on Rosh Hashanah, everything reverts to its original state? It's a very good question. Okay.
Also related to that, we've learned that the world is constantly being created all the time.
Right.
So this is different from that.
Okay. I'm
Yeah,
just
that's
looking to
what
see
I'm
if they
saying.
explained it over here in the notes before I tell you my explanation. I don't see an explanation here in the notes, and it needs to be there, but it's not. But I'm going to say what I think. Okay, very, very good question. So here's the answer, I think, to your question. The answer to your question is, firstly, we're going to take you back to the Tanya. This is the Rabbi Rashab. Okay, the Rebbe Rashab is the fifth Rebbe. In the Tanya, in the Igeres HaKodesh, in the Tanya, there's a famous letter from the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe explains the Pasuk in Tehillim. Sorry, the Pasuk in the Torah. The Torah says, about the land of Israel, it says about it, Einei Hashem Elokecha ba mireishis hashana v'ad achris hashana. The eyes of God are upon the land from the beginning of the year till the end of the year. And based on this verse, the Alter Rebbe explains, he says this is consistent with a famous and a well-known Kabbalistic principle, which is that a year has a beginning and an end, which means it doesn't flow from the end of the year. The next minute is not just the next year and it's like a continuum, but actually there's a break.
Wow.
There's a serious break between one year and the next. Because on Rosh Hashanah, there's an entire new flow of vitality into the world for the new year. And on every year on Rosh Hashanah, there shines a new light in the world that has never shone before. And the principle is that the light of the spiritual energy for the world, the allocation of divine energy for the world, only gets allocated 1 year at a time. And then, not only is it only allocated 1 year at a time, in general, it's a year at a time. In specific, it's every day at a time. In more detail, it happens at every moment, there's another flow of vitality, of energy into the world. In other words, this is consistent with the concept we were explaining in our JLR class the other day, that in Chassidus and in Kabbalah, time is not just measured with a clock, but time reveals to us the inner dimension of the spiritual pulse of the universe. And that there is the energy of the world is a 1 year energy. The batteries expire at the end of the year. The batteries expire at the end of the year. Now you ask a question. So how does it, and the battery is only renewed with the blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah day. That's when the new energy for the year comes into, pulsates through the world again. Here's a good time to tell the famous story. I think we might have mentioned it once before, but it's well known that in Rosh Hashanah of the year 1812, maybe it was 1811, there was a big debate between two of the great Hasidic Rebbes, the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, and Baruch of Mezhibush, about who was better for the Jewish people, Napoleon or the Tsar. And the Alter Rebbe understood and knew that actually the Tsar was going to be better for the Jewish people than Napoleon forever. And in other words, for the future of the Jewish people, for the world, the Tsar needed to win the war. The Alter Rebbe understood this. And Baruch of Mezhibush felt incorrectly that it would be that Napoleon was the one who needed to win the war. And they both knew that whoever would blow the shofar first on Rosh Hashanah, would determine the outcome of the war. That the war was dependent on why? Because blowing of the shofar brings down the whole energy for the year. So whichever Rebbe was going to prevail with the blowing of the shofar would determine the way the whole world would go for the coming year. And so it's known that Baruch Mezhibush called services that year for very early in the morning, and they davened, and they did everything very early in the morning. And when they got to the shofar, he came to blow the shofar. And just as he was about to blow the shofar, he realized that what had happened is that the Alter Rebbe woke up very early in the morning, and before he davened, he blew the shofar. He said the blessings and blew the shofar before davening. And Baruch of Meshipush, who was hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers away, came to blow the shofar. And when he finished, he said, the Litvak has beaten me to it. He knew, no one sent him an email or a WhatsApp or a text message, but he could tell from the blowing of his shofar that he had lost, that the Alter Rebbe had blown the shofar first. So everything is dependent on the blowing of the shofar of Rosh Hashanah, how the whole year will go. So Rachel's question was, we say everything goes back to the way it was. Sort of the world goes into a holding pattern. It sort of reverts back to the beginning of creation, first day of creation. And the real question is, what we really need to do is arouse God's world to come back in. Now, there is a certain, almost like, there is some energy that keeps the world going until blowing of the shofar. But the energy in the world is not the direct involved energy that's going to happen after the blowing of the shofar. There's a little battery backup from Hashem of God's energy. He keeps the world going. But really, there's a need, there's reserves, exactly. There's enough extra energy flowing. But really what needs to happen is that the building of the Malchus that has to happen with the blowing of the shofar. Now, I'm going to tell you something interesting, a little Kabbalistic. For those of you that are interested in the Kabbalah, the Zohar explains in the language of Kabbalah, the way this works is like this. You'll all remember, everybody knows that Malchus is the feminine dynamic of creation. Malchus is the feminine dynamic of creation. And on the sixth day of creation, which was the original Rosh Hashanah, Hashem put Adam to sleep. And from Adam, he took a rib and he built Eve. Right? So first Adam goes to sleep, and then Hashem builds Eve from Adam. So building Eve is building Malchus. Because these are not just, we're talking here about archetypes, and it's symbolic. So building Eve is about building Malchus. So the world, until the blowing of the shofar, until the Malchus is built, until the desire for kingship is built, the desire for Malchus, until it's built, Adam is in a state of sleep. So the world goes into sleep mode until we blow the shofar and build Malchus. So the first time, Hashem did it all. But now, on Rosh Hashanah, we do it. So that is in how these themes are expressed as a story. But the story is a symbolic story. The story is a story of symbolism and archetypes. So in this Maimah, we're stripping it. In the Chabad Chassidus, we don't really talk about it that much in terms of Adam and Eve, even though in the original Mamarim of the Alter Rebbe, in the Zohar, it talks about it more that way. And in the original Mamarim of the Alter Rebbe, it talks about things more in Zoharic language, which is more related to the stories. But by the time we get to the Rebbe Rashab and this Maimah, we're talking about the theoretical concepts outside of the symbolic stories. We're talking about the idea more than without the symbolic story. You understand what I'm saying? But these things are symbolized in the stories as we read them in the Torah and in the Zohar. Any questions or comments?
Well, just one last little tiny comment, if I may. It's interesting that Malchus is translated as kingship, and yet it's a feminine energy. So I'm just, like, why isn't it called queenship instead of kingship?
In Hebrew, it's a very, very good question. In Hebrew, a man is a melech and a queen is a malka.
Right.
And malchus is gender neutral.
Oh,
There is a, malchus can easily be, malchus means the kingship, it could be queenship, it's the same word.
okay.
Hamalchut shela. It's feminine. Malchus is feminine. It's not kingship. So it's interesting. In English, we do this whole in Hebrew also there's gender, but actually Malchus is feminine.
Okay. Thank you.
Malchus is feminine. It will probably be more, you might argue that it's more accurate to say queenship. On Shabbos, we talk about the queen Shabbos, the Malka, the queen.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is in many places referred to as queen.
And
So
or it's also,
Right.
Malchus is also called Shechina, right? And that
and Shechina
obviously,
is feminine as well. Exactly. Very good, Rachel. Very good. Shechina is the same level. Very good.
If you call it royalty, then you get the gender
So in
bias.
English, when we go to exactly, well, so when you go to English, we try to find other words that try to be more gender neutral words. But every language has its whole gender component to it. And actually, yes, we're talking about something feminine over here. Okay, very interesting. Let's now go. What I want to do now is go back a page and hit next page in the Chayenu thing. So it says like this: the flow. Previously, we posed numerous questions regarding the blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and the verses recited in connection to the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. This week, after introducing a few additional questions, we begin the core of the discourse by addressing the fundamental question: why was the world created? Or in other words, what was the benefit of creating the world? If the purpose was merely to reveal godliness within the world, God was already omnipresent before the world was created, and two resolutions will be offered. So the next page of this Maimah that we're going to continue to learn goes through that.
Are we going to get back to the issue of the shofar and Shabbat?
Okay, so Jerry wants to know if we're going to get back to the issue of the shofar and Shabbos.
Because they raised the question, but they didn't
the
answer.
questions, 8 questions, 9 questions, 10 questions, 11th questions, and then chapter 2, the purpose of creation. So the answer, he's going to say like this, Jerry. Here's the answer to your question can be found over here. These 12 questions will be answered at the end of the series in an addendum written by the Rabbi Rashab entitled Hashlamas Hadrush. In the original Maimah of the Rabbi Rashab, the answer can be found on page 713. We're on page 1 still. Okay? And his answer will be found on page 713. Okay? The rest of the series will tackle the central theme of why God created the world. We're not really here to answer these questions. It's the way in. The previous rabbi called these questions the passport to the discourse. You show this is your passport. You go through this. You show it. At passport control, you show this is the opening. His successor, the Rebbe, explained that a passport lets a traveler into a country by allowing the border control to recognize the bearer as a citizen. The commonality that this established indicates that the traveler is welcome, with his citizenship providing a tacit indication of his familiarity and agreement with the laws and mores of the country. The questions in a Hasidic discourse serve a similar function. The simple, readily understandable questions can be appreciated by a wide range of students. This introduces a commonality that makes the more esoteric concepts within the discourse less intimidating.
That's good. The passport, it should be in Canada, the wall.
So this is the passport to get into the Maimahs. We go through all these questions. I can tell you already the answer. I'll tell you the answer. The answer is how is it that you can do without it on Shabbos? So the Rabbi Rashab is going to answer on page 713. But the answer is that Shabbos itself will serve all these purposes. Shabbos has the power that the shofar has, and therefore on Shabbos you don't need a shofar. That's the answer. On Shabbos you don't need a shofar. That's the answer. But we don't need we're going through passport control over here. We're opening up a discussion we're asking questions, we're understanding concepts, and all the real meat of the Maimah really begins in chapter 2, where we're going to talk about the purpose of creation. Okay? So we're still warming up. We've got about another 7 questions to ask before we can get in there. Before you can go through and see your family on the other side of immigration, you got to get through another 7 or 8 questions, Jerry. You don't want to, if you want, you can turn around at Ellis Island, go back on the ship. You don't want to go through this? Get back on the boat, go back to Europe, Mr. Waters, Mr. Jerry Waters.
I guess they didn't have to deal with illegal aliens, huh?
They let
But
them in.
but I have a question about that. If it's because if we don't blow the shofar on Shabbos because we don't need it on Shabbos, then that really has nothing to do with somebody carrying it or not. We don't even need that little, like.
Okay, very good question, Rachel. We'll have to get back to that another day. That's good.
Okay.
We'll talk about this more next time Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos. I'm expecting all of you to come with a serious question and say to me, Rabbi, how could we not have shofar? How could we not have shofar? Everything depends on the shofar. And then we're going to have such a burning question. We're going to have to really go into this in greater depth.
Okay.
But now we're going through immigration. We're going through the passport. We're learning these questions are very important questions. We're not and sometimes the question is better than the answer. It's important to learn these questions, even though we're learning the questions are very important questions. And if you can't fall asleep tonight, Jerry Waters, because of thinking about these questions are disturbing you, then Baruch Hashem, that should be, nothing else should ever keep you up at night. And this should keep you up at night.
Well, I intend to have enough mashka dinner tonight that I'll fall asleep.
Well, I hope that's not, I hope that you, that I'm not sure, I hope that was a joke.
That's a joke. That's a joke.
Okay, good Shabbos, everybody. We're going to take a break now from the Maimah and to be continued next week. Have a wonderful day, everybody. We're going to stop this class. Let me